Time for a little exploration. I'm Joseph. This is Input English. This afternoon, I'm adapting to the environment. Up at the house, it's very hot. In the San Jose area, it's very hot. It's a beautiful day. There's a breeze, but it's very hot down there. And so I went back to some old habits, which date back to when we first arrived in the San Jose area. At that time, the house we were renting had no air conditioning, and so we had to adapt our behavior so that we didn't roast. There are two places you can get cool in the Bay Area when it's really hot. One of them is at the ocean, and the other is up near San Francisco Bay or even in San Francisco proper. So when I saw we were going to have a heat wave, I started thinking about what could I do to get to a place that's cooler. It's very windy here. Otherwise, I would be wearing my Panama hat and get some sun protection. But I figure if I wear that hat out here, it'll blow off and I'll be chasing it. And since there's so much water, I might be fishing it out of the salt marsh. So the better part of valor here is to not wear the hat. We're in the traffic pattern for Palo Alto Airport. So occasionally you may hear an airplane in the area flying the pattern because they're landing right over there. My location is the Baylands Nature Preserve. When European settlers came to this area, they found people already living here, the Ohlone people, and they had been here for thousands of years. The Europeans busied themselves changing things. They put up dikes to drain some of this marshland. They did it to recover salt from the seawater, and they did it to have grazing lands for cattle. This particular area south of San Francisco Bay was a settlement for the Ohlone people. And there is an area not too far from here where they discarded their household waste, their refuse. One of the foods they made use of was oysters. And if you use oysters, when you harvest those oysters, you generate a bunch of oyster shells. So there were mounds of oyster shells. From an archaeological point of view, a mound of discarded waste is called a midden. It's useful to archaeologists to study those middens because the archaeologists can get information about what the people were doing. Now, in the modern era, if you have a big pile of waste generated, for instance, by a big city, we don't call it a midden, we call it a sanitary landfill. When I was a kid, we just called it the dump. The proper term is sanitary landfill. Not far from here, I've already disclosed there was a midden for the Ohlone people, but the city of Palo Alto also created a sanitary landfill. For decades, household waste was piled there and then covered with soil. Eventually, that landfill was closed in favor of using a different landfill, and then it was reclaimed, and that landfill turned into Bixby Park. Now, Bixby Park has a strange spelling. It's spelled with a Y, B-Y-X, not B-I-X. So Bixby Park, built on the site of a previous landfill, is a city park. We're going to go over there shortly. Behind me, there is a large salt marsh. This is habitat for a lot of animals and birds. This park, this nature preserve, is the product of cooperation between conservationists and city officials. The goal here is to preserve habitat. This marshland has no tall trees. As I turn around, you just see grass and shrubs, but no tall trees. I've never been here before. It's one of the lovely byproducts of producing the Input English channel. It gives me a reason to explore places that I've driven past for years. After walking a little ways, I ran into a couple of fellows, and they were easy to spot because they had a radio antenna rigged. And they had a small table and a radio, and they were sitting there chatting away. And these were ham radio operators. And it turns out they come here every week and make radio calls and talk to people as far away as they can. From this vantage point, you see more salt marsh and some water. In this direction, on the horizon, there are the airship hangars that are at Moffett Field. Moffett Federal Airfield is a place where they used to fly dirigibles many decades ago, and there are at least 2 large hangars that were used to house those lighter-than-air craft. They're huge. There are no dirigibles or blimps currently flying out of here, to my knowledge. As I rotate around here, there is a hill with a lot of telephone poles sticking out of it. As I recall, there are 72 of them, and that is Bixby Park, and my plan is to go over there. We'll talk about those. I'm now out on a floating dock. The dock height will change as the tide comes in and goes out. This dock is dedicated to the use by people windsurfing. As I turn around, you can see several windsurfing rigs on the dock. These are interesting because they all have hydrofoils. They all have structures underneath so that when they get going faster, they will lift up out of the water, which will reduce their drag. From this vantage point, you can see the hangars for the dirigibles at Moffett Field. This water is the south end of the San Francisco Bay. I drove over to Bixby Park. Behind me, you can see some low hills, and that's all that's left of the old landfill. This landfill was reclaimed as parkland. This was done many years ago, and they enlisted the help of an architect and some artists. Over here, you can see a bunch of poles. These are like telephone poles. They are phone poles. And these poles were placed as a giant sculpture. There are 72 of them. They're different heights. As I understand it, they were placed vertical, but over time, some of them have tilted a little bit. On the ground next to me is an X. X marks the spot. As I looked closely at that X, I surmised that it was probably visible from space or from altitude. And then I looked very closely, and in the center of the X, there is a little metal device hammered into the surface, and it's a surveyor's marker. So that marker was placed with great precision here to mark that spot, and then the X makes that surveyor's mark visible, presumably from space. I don't know what its use is, but it was put there on purpose. Now you can see I'm in the midst of these poles. The trail goes right up through them, right up through the sculpture. So I'm now on the highest point, or one of the highest points on this former landfill. Gives us a great vantage point of the South Bay. This is another one of the artistic features of this park. The artists set up this wind wave, and the idea behind it is that as wind moves these hanging members of this array, people can visualize the wind as waves. At least that's the explanation they gave us. The only other architectural feature of this park I need to show you is the array of chevrons, and we'll see them shortly. We are still on top of the landfill. That is this park that's been reclaimed from the landfill. It illustrates an interesting point to me. That is, when I looked this place up online, I saw the facts and figures. I had the dates. I understood the history. There's something that I did not understand. But now standing here, I understand it clearly. I told you about the poles and then I showed them to you. There's another structure that they created here with portable highway dividers. These are cast concrete dividers used for road construction, for temporary traffic control. And what they did is put 16 of these highway dividers in a chevron shape. That is, each pair formed a V, and all these chevrons that they created with these dividers pointed in the same direction. What I didn't know is where these chevrons were pointing. They're pointing to the airport. We are exactly in line with the final approach to the Palo Alto airport. So an airplane coming in can use this as a waypoint. They can gauge how they're doing on this landing by noting that they're above these chevrons. These are easy to see. And then they can just glance at their altitude and airspeed, and that will give them a lot of information about how their landing is going to be. Runways tend to be aligned with the prevailing wind. It's not always possible to do that, and some airports have several runways so that as weather conditions change, they can use the one that is closest to the prevailing wind. It appears to me that the wind coming at us today is coming directly from the airport to my position here on these chevrons. So the pilots who are landing their aircraft have a pure headwind. There won't be much crosswind component. So I'll turn around and you can see the chevrons. And if you project a line from the end of the chevrons, you may be able to make out the Palo Alto airport. It's a windy day. It'll be an interesting test of my noise cancellation system. Hopefully it will serve us well today. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.